Today on Uncommon Sense, join me as I talk to Michael Steele, an audio technician and host for We Are One Body Catholic Radio, as well as an adjunct lecturer in philosophy at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Stay tuned. Grettelyn, your host on Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I am pleased to be joined here by a friend and former colleague, Michael Steele. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well, Grettelyn. Yes, thanks for having me on the show. It's good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to see you, and it's good to have you. We've had many Chesterton conversations in the past, and I'm excited to have another one. So, as I said, Michael Steele is both a host and audio technician at the radio station where I actually used to work, and then he's also a lecturer in philosophy. So we're going to probably tap more into the philosophy side, but who knows? Anything you want our listeners to know about you, Michael, or that might help them?
Sure. I've sort of the role with We Are One Body Radio is a grace, but I've also just always enjoyed delving into philosophy and sort of the world of ideas, and so I get kind of the best of both worlds. I get sort of audio radio on one side, and then I get the interaction with the students and the grappling with these great ideas at St. Vincent College on the other. Happily married. We have 3 kids ranging from 10 to 2, and so that keeps us busy. And fishing is fast becoming the Steele family recreation of choice. So
nice. So nice. So fly fishing or like regular fishing?
Just regular fishing for the moment. Maybe we'll get to fly fishing one day, but you know.
I feel like regular fishing is a more contemplative, calm.
It is, right?
It's nice. Yeah.
It is. So you can, there's plenty of moments for abstract thinking and contemplating the purpose of existence when you're watching your bobber.
Beautiful. I think Chesterton would approve. That sounds really, really fun. My husband actually for Father's Day asked for some fishing equipment. He wants to start taking my son out. So
wow, great.
It's a good one. Yeah. It's a good hobby.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit of how you got into G.K. Chesterton in the first place, if you can remember. I don't know when that was.
Sure. Well, I'm a fan. And first of all, let me just say I'm humbled and honored to be on this show because I've seen the caliber of people who have preceded me, and it's very humbling. I was first introduced to Chesterton when I was in high school, Father Brown Mysteries, and I remember reading through, I just couldn't put them down. And then I spent some time discerning a priestly vocation in the seminary, and especially when I was doing my licentiate in philosophy in Rome, sort of my recreational reading was volume 14 of Chesterton's collected works, his fairy tales and short stories. I would, he's such an amazing storyteller. I would say though as well, throughout the years, enjoying, The Man Who Was Thursday, chapter 4 from Orthodoxy, the Ethics of Elfland, was really very insightful read. And, and then more recently with the Dumb Ox, and just enjoying his style. And then in 2014, I was teaching at a small Catholic school in North County, San Diego, St. Joseph Academy. Shout out to Crusaders out there. And Mr. Dale Alquist came and gave us a conference on the great Chesterton. And I remember him making this reflection, which I really found insightful. And it's a reoccurring theme when I read Chesterton, is that Well, one, Chesterton's love for paradox, right?
Mm-hmm.
The apparent contradiction as a tool for reawakening wonder in the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that idea of, I remember reading a short story by Chesterton where it's a great adventure, but the adventure culminates in coming home and seeing ordinary home life with new perspective, that kind of idea. So, and Dale did it a lot more eloquently, you know, but that idea of, paradox is a way to reawaken wonder in the ordinary. So,
Yeah, no, I love that aspect of Chesterton, and the fact that everything can be an adventure. I think is very. I don't know. It gives you a certain sense of hope that is hard to find in modern culture, or impossible to find. Uh, so
right.
it's wonderful. You know, you can find hope and adventure in your state in life, in your vocation, and whatever it is in your job. And it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be doing anything quote unquote extraordinary. You can be just doing what God wants you to do in your ordinary life.
Right. And that in itself is the adventure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he say that once that, what was it? I'm probably going to mess this up, but like an adventure is a inconvenience rightly considered,
Mm-hmm.
and an inconvenience is an adventure wrongly considered.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of like, if there's a balance between reality as it throws itself at us and then our internal reaction with respect to that reality, you know, and that's where the sort of the existential tension lies, you know, and it's true. Life is a great,
No, I have another favorite quote of his where he says, "We're still in the Garden of Eden. It's only our eyes that have changed." Like, oh yes,
that's right.
So beautiful. Yeah, just he had such a right perspective on the world while standing on his head, you know, and putting everything on its head. It's so cool.
Yeah, I just admire his brilliance, like you were saying, his insight, and just how much he wrote. I mean, the man was, he was just an anomaly. He was just, yeah.
I know. I look at him and I'm like, well, I'd like to write one decent thing before I die.
Right, same here, right?
Yeah, like I've heard some stories he was writing one and dictating another at the same time, and I'm like,
it's
wow.
Right up there with Thomas Aquinas and Augustine.
Yeah, like amazing, truly. Which, let's use this as a segue. Did want to talk to you a little bit about Chesterton's work, The Dumb Ox, which is his biography of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Sure.
Widely considered by philosophers to be like one of the best biographies of St. Thomas, which is astounding because I forget who said this, but somebody said, you know, Chesterton picked up the Summa and sort of like flipped through it. And then he went and wrote this biography. And you're like, wow. So, you know, he definitely was tapped into the community of saints, I think. And it's pretty clear. Now, we were talking before we started recording here about the parallels that Chesterton draws between Thomas Aquinas and St. Francis. Just having come off of the annual conference where our theme was St. Francis, it's really neat to kind of see the other friar, you know, and get that perspective on that. Do you want to comment on that comparison at all?
Sure. So in the introduction of the Dumb Ox, I think Chesterton kind of compares and contrasts St. Francis of Assisi with St. Thomas Aquinas. I think he does it as a way to make Thomas Aquinas a little bit less intimidating. You know, when people talk about Thomism and, Tom and the Summa or the Summa contra Gentiles or De Ente et Essentia, right? It's a little bit intimidating, or just how logical and clear, St. Thomas's train of thought is. Versus the animal loving, poverty embracing kind of, free spirit, existentialist that St. Francis is, right? And it's I feel like as well there's a lot of empathy in Chesterton's writing and that first introduction, especially when he's talking about St. Thomas. I think, as we all know, Chesterton himself was corpulent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so was St. Thomas Aquinas. So I feel like there's a loving empathy towards St. Thomas Aquinas when he's comparing and contrasting these two figures. My takeaway there from that was that Chesterton makes a point that in every age, God is working in that particular culture's needs. And in every age, he raises up people who address what that culture needs. And so in the case for St. Francis of Assisi, culture needed a sort of spark of romanticism, of kind of that sense of wild adventure in the pursuit of God, right? And that's what Francis of Assisi brings, that radically embracing God's providence by living poverty, right? And enjoying creation as it is, but also recognizing that creation is from and points to God, right? Mm-hmm. And that God is our final destination. And then when he talks about St. Thomas Aquinas, he's talking about a world that has gone a little bit out of control and needed sort of the light of truth, the grounding of a deeper intellectual foundation. And so I really found that interesting. And he makes a beautiful point where he says, I wrote down a quote. I feel like the best way to read Chesterton is by like taking quotes on him.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
He's so quotable. It makes sense.
Right. He makes it easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he says, quote, "Every saint is a man before he is a saint, and a saint may be made of every sort or kind of man." Right. So that idea of we work with what we have, right? And yet God is working in us as well. So there's that dynamic. So, and it's not, he makes that point, it's not as if Francis and Thomas Aquinas were kind of devotees of worldly gurus. What they were, first and foremost, they were devotees of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And because they were devotees of Jesus Christ, they brought their natural talents into the world and were leavened into their particular cultural context. So yeah.
Beautiful. When Joe and I took a couple of episodes before the conference to discuss the St. Francis book, and at one point one of us commented that it's so interesting that God takes, when you surrender yourself to God, there's sort of a misconception that you're going to lose yourself, but what actually happens is you become more yourself, and you're able to be who God wanted you to be and who he created you to be, with all your sort of special talents that nobody else has. And it's so clear in these two saints. It's so beautiful.
Right. Yeah. We enter into sort of a more objectively fuller existence of what it means to be who we are, what it means to be human. You know, it's sort of like that parable of the seed that has to die in order to have new life. So.
Right. And you get to use the things that make you yourself in a way that's really like rightly ordered and is the most profitable for all eternity. There's a part in the St. Francis book where he talks about St. Clare and how if she had run away to just marry some guy, the world would have loved it, but she would have been like forgotten. But since she ran away to marry God and she started this order, it's still here today.
Right. Yeah.
How amazing, it's so incredible.
Isn't that interesting? Right. I was having a conversation with someone recently and they said that, having these existential thoughts about legacy and what to leave behind. And this person mentioned, if someone can create a structure, right, of some sort, that becomes a lasting legacy for that person after they move on. And God is the master artisan with that, we just have to work with this free will thing, like you're saying, that sense of losing ourselves, first of all, letting go of our preconceptions, et cetera, and then giving to God.
Yeah, and it's just becoming like clearer to me kind of lately in my life that uh, that idea of leaving a legacy in a worldly sense is sort of, it's just so limited. I mean, you can write a book, you can build a structure, you can found a university even, but like it's just not gonna last in the same way that these saints who have given their lives to God have lasted for, some of them for thousands of years. Like
Right.
it's incredible to me that um, you know, if you want to be immortal, here's how to
Right.
actually do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, you're not going to do it through building a building necessarily, or uh, yeah. So Thomas did it through writing a book, but it was a book about God. So yeah, whew, through writing more than a book, through writing a ton.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah, I've got some of your notes here. Uh, just wonderful that you said something about like Christ transforming the world through the incarnation, and then these two saints transforming the world in their own ways. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. When I read that, that was a watershed moment for me as well. I really like that point because I am a sort of a devotee of Aristotle,
Mm.
and he makes a point that again, St. Thomas Aquinas wasn't a devotee of Aristotle. He was a devotee of Jesus Christ first, and then his great life work, of course, was reconciling Aristotelian thought with the light of faith, right?
Right.
What jives with Christianity and what's just kind of from pagan worldview, right? So that for me was a game changer. I was thinking, oh, true, right? I ought to be working on being a devotee of Jesus Christ first, and then appreciate Aristotle for who he is as well,
Right.
right?
Well, and it's it's true charity, because charity is love of God and then love of neighbor for the sake of God. So you have this, even love of Aristotle should be for the sake of God, and it's pretty clear, I think, in Thomas Aquinas.
Right, right, right. That the Benedictine quote, right? That in all things God should be glorified,
Mm.
right?
Amen.
So the reference point is always God, and that I enjoyed that. The idea of bringing Christ into the world of pagan thought, and even just thinking about, we talked beforehand of St. Thomas Aquinas and using our talents, and how he was a very thoughtful and quiet young man, and hence the nickname that he quote unquote earned by his fellow students when he was studying, the dumb ox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was slow in speech and he was quiet. And but Saint Albert, his teacher, said, we call this man a dumb ox, but his bellowing in doctrine will one day resound throughout the world. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea of, again, understanding what's most important in life. And his family, he was born into a wealthy family, noble family. I think he was a cousin to an emperor,
something like that.
Right. And so his family, when kind of understanding his natural talents, were encouraging him to join a very prestigious, well-established Benedictine monastery in Monte Cassino, of all places.
Become an abbot, yeah.
Right. And Monte Cassino is where Saint Benedict and Saint Scholastica are buried, right? So that's like the center of Benedictine life. And yet he chose to join this upstart, startup mendicant order. They had to make their living by donations, and so nothing was ever set in terms of how they were going to sustain themselves, right? The Dominicans, right? And so that in and of itself, that idea of dying to self, trying something new, growing in one's pursuit of God, right? And so his family tried to oppose him, through various schemes, which of course he thwarted.
I love that chapter in the book where Chesterton talks about him getting like kidnapped by his brothers, and they're trying to like bring him back, and he's just kind of like very calmly like, no, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
It's so funny. It's yeah.
You can just imagine, right? A man who is more at home with the world of abstract ideas, right? Rather than the world of like knee-jerk emotional reactions,
Right.
just like,
It's so contrary to our day and age. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're so quick to just react, as opposed to just taking a half step back and thinking about things and responding.
Right. So. And looking at things my husband and I were talking about this last night, actually, that a big problem that we see in the modern culture is nobody's looking at a thing as to whether or not it's true. They're looking at it as to whether or not it like makes them feel good or supports their idea. And it's very problematic. It's very anti-Thomistic.
Yes.
And it makes me think of, there's a quote that you pulled it out, and I love that one about an egg is an egg.
Yes.
I'm actually just going to go ahead and read the whole thing, if that's okay, because it's just so great.
Sure. It's like classic Chesterton.
Yeah, it's classic Chesterton, but it's also like classic Thomas, and I think this is a point where they really connect in a cool way. Chesterton says, "Against all this, the philosophy of St. Thomas stands founded on the universal common conviction that eggs are eggs. The Hegelian may say that an egg is really a hen because it is a part of an endless process of becoming. The Berkeleyan may hold that poached eggs only exist as a dream exists, since it is quite as easy to call the dream the cause of the eggs as the eggs the cause of the dream. The pragmatist may believe that we get the best out of scrambled eggs by forgetting that they ever were eggs and only remembering the scramble. The Thomist stands in the broad daylight of the brotherhood of men, in their common consciousness that eggs are not hens or dreams or mere practical assumptions, but things attested by the authority of the senses, which is from God."
That's so great, right?
It's so yes, and it's funny. It's delightful. We laugh at the one part. It's just it's Chesterton. It's his special gift. Talk about a saint for a certain time.
Yes.
He just brings this absolute clarity and says, "This is why I love Thomas, because he did the same thing. Eggs are eggs."
Right. It's so, that idea of, well, first of all, Chesterton's ability to understand what someone's saying and then to synthesize it and then apply it with his own literary style is brilliant, right? Mm-hmm. But that's it. Like what he's basically saying is, as you're talking about the conversation you had with your husband, that idea of post-contemporary modern society, we suffer from what Pope Benedict calls the dictatorship of relativism. Mm-hmm. There is no objective truth. Reality is meaningless or pointless. And so everyone else in their pure subjectivity is left to come up with what is true and what is good and what is meaningful for themselves. The flip side of that is if you cut off any kind of objective point of reference for truth, then we become the sole criteria for what is true. And so when you are told that you are wrong, we get all emotionally bent out of shape because essentially you're being told that you yourself as a person are wrong or bad or et cetera, versus the more, what his point here is, Thomistic philosophy points to reality as our starting point and our point of reference for the assumptions or the judgments we make about reality, right? Thomas would say that truth is the conformity of our mind with reality, or he would say adequatio rea et intellectus, that idea of when we make a judgment about reality first and foremost stands apart and in and of itself. Its existence doesn't depend on our knowing it for its existence, right?
Right.
So when we say something about reality, because it's coming from our subjectivity, we have to check and make sure that what we're saying about reality jives with reality itself. And that's what truth is, right? And that's our big crisis of the modern era, is that we don't see that. Or
there's another, I don't remember what book it's from, but it's very relevant for our times, where Chesterton says something like, if a man thinks he's a chicken, you got to just tell him he's wrong.
That's right.
Like right. there's a certain sense where like you can't keep beating around the bush. You just have to tell the truth, even if it's something that's like a mental illness. So like it's this idea of like you gotta just you hand someone the egg and you say, this is an egg.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Sorry.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One of my professors of philosophy hails from Ireland, and he would always say that as well. Especially when we were talking about empiricism or any philosopher after Descartes, right? He basically said, yeah, you're just, if they're denying their sense experience, just smack them with a 2x4,
They'll feel it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
Yeah. Have you read Man Alive by G.K. Chesterton?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you should read that one. It's essentially all about sort of startling people back to life, who are sort of sleepy and in a state of like living death almost, because they're just so lazy and whatever. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you. It's Man Alive?
It's all one word, yeah, Man Alive.
Man Alive.
I recommend it to all readers or all listeners. It's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, in preparing for this podcast, I realized there's so much of Chesterton I haven't read either, and there's so much more to be read. Just, yeah. Anyways.
None of us will ever read all of him, so. Yeah.
I was looking like, can one get the collected works? But I don't even think they're sold like as a set.
Yeah, it's sort of. I mean, we sell the collected works, but I think we're adding to them.
Okay.
So there's like volumes. There's like volume 1, 2, whatever. I think there's a lot. There's maybe a dozen, and then it just keeps growing because we're finding more and more and more all the time, that's
great.
Really neat.
Yes.
Like a little precursor to the beatific vision. It's like we just get to keep finding more Chesterton.
That's
cool.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, I hate to cut things short here, but we're getting really close to the end of our time. Is there anything else that you wanted to say here about Thomas, about Chesterton, anything at all? Fishing?
Wow. My goodness. Let's see. I mean, there's so much to say. The problem would be narrowing it down.
I know. Yeah.
I like this one quote as well. It stood out to me. It's from the Dumb Ox. Again, classic Chesterton. He said, quote, "I suppose it is true in a sense that a man can be a fundamental skeptic, but he cannot be anything else, certainly not even a defender of fundamental skepticism." Just like, again, I just love that. He points out the internal conflict of skepticism, that flaw of logic. Like, well, if you doubt everything, you can't even defend your own position because it's undefendable.
Yep. So. Yeah. And, I think that's why he says, atheism so often ends in suicide, because where is there to go,
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
Which, part of the point of this podcast, we want to get people to wake up, to see reality, and to come to God through Chesterton, really.
Amen. Yes. So read Chesterton. I guess that would be like an exhortation from a big fan. And and the Dumb Ox is a great place to start. Or The Man Who Was Thursday, for me, or any of the Father Brown mysteries.
The nice thing is you can start anywhere. I started with a very obscure book and completely hated it until I got to the very end of the first chapter, and then I was like, this man's brilliant. I have to read everything he's ever written. Because that's the paradox came. Yeah.
What was it, if I may ask?
It was Tales of the Longbow. which
Oh,
I'm sure it's out of print. Good luck finding it. It might be on our
okay.
website if it's anywhere.
Okay.
Chesterton.org. You might be able to find it there.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, it's kind of a someday I'll tell my origin story. But somebody
Mm.
recommended that I read The Man Who Was Thursday. They had taken it out from the library, so I went and got this other book, and yeah, and then yeah, God, I had a policy back then. I still do, of giving every book at least a whole chapter before I said no, I'm done with this.
There you go.
And it was right at the end of the chapter that the twist came, and I was like, oh, I'm done. I'm done. That's it. I'm done. I'm taken. This guy's, and I've been reading him for the past almost 15 years. Thank God.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
yeah.
that's, that twist, that end twist. I also love that style. I think I read Four Faultless Felons as well.
That's a good one too.
Right. I'd like to read his work on how he became a Catholic. I think it's called How I Became a Catholic.
Yeah. So. I've read it, but it's been a while, so it'd be worth returning to. Anyway, if anybody wants to find more Chesterton to read, visit chesterton.org. We have a lot of good resources. We have recommendations. We sell a lot of his books, probably more than most people. And unlike some other large booksellers, we are an apostolate. So when you buy a book from us, you're actually supporting something really, really good. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for tuning in with me. It was really fun. It was great to catch up, and it was really fun to talk Chesterton again.
Thank you, Grettelyn. Yes, I very much enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for tuning in. It's been really great. I hope that you will listen more. Hit that like button, subscribe button. Don't miss a single episode. Because as we all know, Chesterton is better with friends. Thanks for listening.